Lara beamed as she wrapped her arms around Vincent, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I'm pregnant, Vincent!" Her voice was filled of excitement. A smile wired as though she had just given him the best news in the world. Vincent stood stiffly in her embrace, the words hanging heavy in the air around him. Pregnant? His mind raced and his throat went dry. All he could manage to say was wow. Lara pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a confused smile. "That's all you have to say, wow?" She laughed softly, but her eyes searched his face for more. Vincent forced a smile, but inside, his world was spinning. His life flashed before his eyes. The years he spent at university, the grueling hours of exams and assignments, and now the factory job he had barely started. It was temporary, not enough to build a life on, and now, Lara, his high school sweetheart, the one person who had been with him through it all, was pregnant. He wasn't ready. How could he provide for a baby when he could barely provide for himself? Lara's smile wavered. As she sensed his hesitations, she gently let go of him, her hands resting on his chest. "Aren't you happy, Vincent?" Her voice was quieter now, tinged with worry. Vincent swallowed hard, trying to push down the panic that was rising in his chest. He nodded, forcing the words out. "Of course I'm happy," he said, his voice tight. "It's just, I'm surprised, that's all." Lara looked relieved, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said, stepping back a little, "but we've been together for so long, Vincent. This is a blessing, right? We've talked about having a family one day." Vincent nodded again, but his mind was far away. A family, he thought. How can I even think about a family when I don't have a steady job? His stomach churned with anxiety. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind, and he turned to Lara. His brow furrowed. "But wait, didn't you say you were on birth control?" Lara shifted on her feet, a smile faltering. "I am," she said softly, glancing away. I was. I missed the day. I didn't think it would matter, but I guess here we are." Vincent felt a tightness in his chest. He tried to keep his voice steady. "So you missed one day and now you're pregnant." He couldn't help the edge in his voice. Lara frowned, her eyes searching his. "I didn't do it on purpose, Vincent. It just happened. But it's okay, right? We'll figure it out together, won't we?" Vincent opened his mouth to respond, but the word caught in his throat. His mind was spinning with thought of bills, rent, and the uncertainty of his future. He was barely managing the contract job at the factory. It didn't pay much, and there was no guarantee they would keep him once the contract ended. How could he take care of a baby when he couldn't even take care of himself? Lara's voice broke through his thoughts, softer now, almost pleading. "Vincent, please, talk to me. I can see something is bothering you." He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside him. He didn't want to hurt her, but he couldn't pretend everything was fine. "I'm just scared, Lara. I mean, a baby right now. I don't even know how we're going to manage." Lara's eyes filled with understanding, and she reached for his hands, squeezing it gently. "I know, Vincent, I'm scared too, but we'll figure it out. We've always gotten through tough times together." He looked into her eyes and saw the hope, the love she had for him. She was trying to stay strong for the both of them, but he could see the fear hiding behind her words. Vincent sighed and ran a hand through his hair. His thoughts tangled. It's not where I thought I'll be, you know. I wanted to get a stable job, save up, maybe get a place for us. I wanted to be ready before this happened." Lara's face softened and she nodded. "I know, Vincent, I know. But life doesn't always go the way we want." She smiled weakly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I believe we'll be okay. We love each other, and that's what matters." Vincent wanted to believe her, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a ton of bricks. He imagined sleepless nights, the cries of a newborn, the endless expenses, the sacrifices he would have to make. But as he looked at Lara, he realized that no matter how afraid he was, they were in this together. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly, squeezing her hand. "I promise." Lara smiled, though her eyes were still watery. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into his chest. "I knew you would understand." Vincent held her close, but his mind was still buzzing with uncertainty. Vincent paced the small clustered room he shared with his friend Jerry, anxiety thrumming through his veins like a life wire. The cramped space felt stifling, the walls closing in on him as he muttered under his breath. What will I do? Calm down now, Jerry said, slumping back on his bed. With a sigh, you and Lara have been together since secondary school. This pregnancy was kind of inevitable. I can't afford to be a father, Vincent snapped, his frustration bubbling over. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the impending responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulder. Tell us to terminate it then, Jerry suggested casually, as if they were discussing the weather rather than a life-altering situation. Vincent stopped pacing and turned to face his friend, his heart pounding. I can't. Lara will not agree. She's excited about the baby. Dude, it's your life too. You need to think about your future, Jerry said, leaning forward, his expression serious. What if you're not ready? What if you're not even stable enough to take care of a child? Vincent shook his head, feeling the panic rise again. I can't just ask her to do that. I can't. Jerry interrupted, pulling out a small packet from his bedside drawer. Yeah, take this, he said, handing Vincent a pill bottle. I heard about this drug. That works for miscarriages. Just put it in her food or drinks. Vincent recoiled, his stomach churning. You want me to drug her? I can't do that, Jerry. That's wrong. Jerry shrugged, his expression unwavering. What's wrong is bringing a child into this world when you're not ready. Just think about it. For the next few weeks, Vincent wrestled with his conscience. Each time he prepared Lara's meals, he felt the weight of the pill in his pocket, a constant reminder of the choice he was contemplating. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, watching a movie, Vincent's heart raised as he stirred the drug into her drink. Here you go, babe. Just a little something to help you relax, he said, forcing a smile. Lara took the drink with a beaming smile. Thanks, Vincent. You always know how to take care of me. Vincent swallowed hard, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach as she sipped the drink. He tried to focus on the movie, but his mind was a storm of guilt and fear. Days turned into weeks, and despite his efforts, Lara's pregnancy continued. Each time Vincent saw her glowing face, he felt a fresh wave of panic wash over him. It was like the universe was mocking him, insisting that he face the consequences of his action. Jerry, it didn't work, Vincent exclaimed, slumping against the wall one day after Lara left for work. She's still pregnant. Guy, if birth control and this pill didn't work, then you need to rest. This baby wants to come, Jerry replied. Vincent paced again, the familiar rhythm returning. I can't handle this. What if I fail? What if I can't provide for her or the baby? I can't just walk away. Then don't walk away, Jerry said, his tone softening. Be there for her. Talk to her. You can't hide from this, Vincent. It's happening, whether you like it or not. Vincent stopped, turning to face his friend. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I mess up everything? Jerry stood up, crossing his arms. Listen, you're not going to know unless you try. This is scary for both of you. Talk to her. Let her know how you feel. You're in this together. Taking a deep breath, Vincent felt the weight of Jerry's words sinking. You're right. I have to face this, he admitted, though uncertainty still gnawed at him. That evening, as they sat in the kitchen, Vincent felt a mix of dread and determination as he waited for Lara to return home. When she walked in, her face lit up with a smile. Her heart softened for a moment. His heart softened for a moment. Hey love, how was your day? She asked, her eyes sparkling. It was okay, Vincent replied, his voice shaky. Can we talk? Lara's smile faltered slightly, and she nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Sure, what's on your mind? He took a deep breath, his heart racing. I've been thinking a lot about the baby and, well, about us. Lara sat down, her expression shifting to one of concern. Is something wrong? You seemed distant lately. Vincent hesitated, searching for the right words. I'm scared, Lara. I'm scared about being a dad and not being able to provide for you and the baby. I've never been responsible for anyone but myself. Lara's eyes softened and she reached out, taking his hands in hers. Vincent, I understand. This is scary for me too. But we can do this together. I believe in us. But what if I fail, he asked. Is fear rising again? What if I can't do it? Then we figure it out, she said firmly, squeezing his hand. I love you, Vincent. We face challenges together. We'll face this one too. Tears pricked Vincent's eyes as he looked at her. You really mean that? Of course I do, she replied, her voice steady. I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else. As he stared into her eyes, Vincent felt a flicker of hope amidst his fear. Maybe he could be a good father. Maybe they could build a life together, no matter how uncertain it felt right now. Okay, he said, finally allowing himself to smile. Let's do this together. From the moment their daughter was born, Vincent felt his world shift. Lara beamed with joy, cradling their newborn with pride and love. But Vincent stood in the corner of the hospital room, his heart pounding. When the nurse asked for the baby's name, Vincent blurted out, Pecula. Lara shot him a curious look, but didn't question him. She assumed it was just his way of expressing the uniqueness of their child. Pecula it is, Lara said with a soft chuckle, kissing the tiny head of her daughter. Despite the odd choice of name, everything seemed to be falling into place. Lara was happy with her little family. Though her friends had often warned her that Vincent wasn't husband material. He wasn't from a wealthy family and he had struggled to hold steady jobs, but Lara didn't care. She loved him for his heart and not his wallet. As the weeks passed, Vincent found himself slowly getting over his fears of fatherhood. Pecula was beautiful and innocent, and he loved her in ways he never thought possible. But something dark began to brew beneath the surface. The nightmares began innocently enough at first. It was just Pecula appearing in his dreams, giggling or playing, but soon, the dreams grew darker. In one, she was chasing him through an endless corridor, a tiny feet pitter-pattering on the floor as her laughter echoed in his ears. No matter how fast he ran, she was always right behind him. In another, he woke to find her standing over him with a strange, malevolent smile, her small hands reaching for his throat. The worst part was waking up in a cold sweat, only to find Pecula watching him from her crib. One Saturday afternoon, Vincent checked awake from another nightmare. His heart raced as the dream's vivid details clung to him. Pecula chasing him with eyes glowing and a natural red. He gasped, trying to catch his breath. Dada, a soft voice called. Vincent's eye flew open. Pecula was standing next to his bed, her little hands clutching the edge of the mattress. She smiled sweetly, her innocent giggle filling the room. Dada, she replied, reaching out to him. Vincent flinched involuntarily. The nightmare still clung to him, and in his half-awake state, he struggled to separate dream from reality. His chest tightened with fear. Lara, he shouted. His wife came rushing into the room, worry etched across her face. What's wrong? She asked, glancing between him and their daughter. I just... Vincent stammered. Running a hand through his hair, had another nightmare. Lara sighed, kneeling to scoop Pecula into her arms. She's just a baby, Vincent. She loves you. You need to relax. Vincent nodded, but deep down, he couldn't shake the lingering dread. Unable to bear the nightmares any longer, Vincent sought help. He found himself sitting in a dimly lit office, across from a pastor who specialized in interpreting dreams. The man was elderly, with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through Vincent. Your dreams, they are no coincidence, the pastor said, his voice low and ominous. Your daughter, Pecula, you say her name is. Vincent nodded, anxiety gnawing at his insides. She's not of this world, the pastor continued, leaning forward. The child is connected to dark forces. If you do not act, you will lose everything. She comes from a satanic kingdom, sent to destroy your life. Vincent's stomach dropped. What do you mean? She's just a baby. She may be a baby now, but the darkness within her will grow. You must take action. If you do not, you will lose your job, your peace, and your sanity. The words echoed in Vincent's mind as he left the church. It seemed impossible. How could his own daughter, so innocent and pure, be the cause of his suffering? But the nightmares had been relentless, and his fear was growing. He shook his head, trying to dispel the pastor's grim predictions. Yet, just days later, disaster struck. Vincent was working late, exhausted from his sleepless nights, when he made a critical error at the factory. A mistake in packaging products led to a massive recall, and Vincent was promptly fired. When he came home that night, the weight of his failure was too much to bear. Bursting through the door, he yelled in frustration, his voice echoing through the small apartment. This is all your fault, he screamed, glaring at Pecula, who sat innocently on the living room floor playing with her toys. Lara rushed to calm him, but he was inconsolable. I lost my job because of her. Ever since she was born, everything has gone wrong. Vincent's voice was twisted in anger, his voice breaking. Vincent, stop! Lara pleaded, shooting Pecula with her body. She's just a child. But Vincent wasn't listening. He stormed through the apartment, cursing the day Pecula was born, his words dripping with resentment. That night, he drank himself to sleep, trying to drown out the shame and fear. Years passed, and Vincent's life spiraled further out of control. He struggled to keep any job, his nights haunted by the same recurring dreams. Pecula, now a bright and curious child, bore the brunt of his frustrations. Vincent had turned to alcohol, and every time he took a swing, his anger towards his daughter grew. "You're the reason I'm like this," he would shout at her over and over again. "Everything went wrong because of you." Pecula's wide eyes and innocence would shrink away, tears streaming down her face as Lara intervened, pulling her daughter close. The neighbors knew about Vincent's rages, but nothing seemed to calm the storm inside him. As Pecula grew older, the household became more unbearable. Vincent's drinking worsened, and his once loving relationship with Lara crumbled under the weight of his bitterness. Every time Pecula looked at her father, she saw nothing but disdain, a constant reminder that she was never wanted, never loved. One evening, as Vincent sat slumped in his chair, the familiar bottle of alcohol in his hand, Pecula quietly approached him. She was now 4, her innocent eyes clouded with the confusion of a child who had never known her father's love. "Daddy," she asked softly, her voice trembling. Vincent didn't look at her. He just stared blankly at the wall, the drink in his hand. "Why do you hate me?" Pecula asked, her voice barely a whisper. For the first time in years, Vincent's gaze shifted. He looked at her, really looked at her. And for a brief moment, the weight of everything hit him. He had become the man he has always feared, broken, lost, and consumed by his own darkness. But instead of answering her, he simply took another drink. And Pecula, with tears in her eyes, turned and walked away. The weight of her father's silence, heavier than any words he could have spoken. It was a bright Sunday morning, the sun streaming through the curtains as Lara hurried around the house, getting ready. Her parents had called, informing they had landed safely at the airport after visiting her older sister abroad. She was excited to see them after a month, but her heart was heavy at the thought of leaving Pecula alone with Vincent. Despite his constant mood swings and erratic behavior, she had to trust him today. "Vincent, I will be gone for a couple of hours to pick up my parents. Can you watch over Pecula?" she asked, carefully masking the concern in her voice. Vincent sat at the kitchen table, staring into his cup of tea. He didn't look up. "I'll be fine," he muttered. Lara hesitated, glancing towards Pecula, who was playing with her dolls in the corner of the living room. The innocent child looked so happy and carefree, oblivious to the tension that often filled their home. "Okay," Lara said softly, pressing a quick kiss to Pecula's head before heading out the door. "I'll be back soon." At the airport, Lara's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alabi, stepped out of the arrival gates, pulling their luggage behind them. Mrs. Alabi spotted Lara instantly and waved with a big smile. "Lara, my dear," she called, enveloping her daughter in a warm hug. "It's been too long." "It really has," Lara smiled, pulling back to greet her father. Mr. Alabi chuckled, giving his daughter a firm pat on the back. "Where's our granddaughter, eh? We haven't seen Pecula in months. She must have grown so much by now." Lara's smile faltered slightly. "She's home with Vincent." Mrs. Alabi raised an eyebrow. "Why won't you let us help with Pecula? We have offered to take her for a few weeks. Give you both some time to yourself." Lara sighed, pushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I know, Mom. It's just that Vincent's pride. He doesn't want to rely on anyone else. He says he can manage." "But is he managing?" her father asked, concern deepening the lines on his forehead. "I don't know," Lara's voice wavered for a moment. But she quickly composed herself. "It's complicated." They loaded the luggage into the car, and as they drove back to Lara's house, her parents exchanged worried glances, sensing that their daughter's marriage was more strained than she was letting on. Back at the home, Vincent stared at Pecula from the kitchen. His tea had gone cold, untouched, as dark thoughts crept into his mind. Pecula had fallen asleep on the couch, her tiny body coiled up under a blanket. The sight of her so peacefully only intensified the voices in his head. "She's the reason everything is ruined." Vincent stood up, heading towards the stove. The kettle whistled as he poured hot water into a cup, steam rising in tendrils. His hand trembled slightly as he held the cup, his gaze flickering towards the small fire on the stove. He could end it now, end the torment. The thought came unbidden, but it was persistent, gnawing at him. He could feel the weight of the pastor's words pressing down on him. The child is connected to dark forces. Vincent gripped tightly on the handle of the kettle. He imagined throwing Pecula into the flames. His breathing grew ragged, his heart racing. Suddenly, the front door burst open, startling him from his dark reverie. Lara muttered under his breath, panic flooding his veins. Lara hurried inside, her parents following close behind. Something was off. The house was too quiet. Vincent, Specula, Lara called, her voice rising in urgency. As she stepped into the living room, her heart stopped. There, standing over their sleeping daughter was Vincent, his face twisted in a marks of hatred. He held the kettle of boiling water above Specula, his hand trembling as he prepared to pour it on her. Vincent, no! Lara screamed, running towards them. But it was too late. As she lunged forward to stop him, the scalding water splashed from the kettle. It hit Specula's body, and some spilled onto Lara's outstretched hands. The pain was immediate and searing, but all Lara could hear was Specula's piercing scream as her delicate skin blistered under the heat. Mrs. Alabi's hand flew to her mouth, and Mr. Alabi rushed forward, pulling Vincent away from the scene. You monster! Mr. Alabi shouted, restraining Vincent as Lara scooped up Specula, tears streaming down her face. She clutched her daughter close, despite the pain in her hands. Specula's cries filled the house, a sound so heartbreaking that it tore through everyone's present. Call an ambulance, Lara shouted frantically to her mother, who fumbled with her phone, her own hands shaking from shock. Vincent stood there, silent and still, his eyes hollow. The weight of what he had done seemed to settle on him, but it was too late for remorse. The damage was done. The emergency room was a blur of frantic doctors and nurses as they rushed Specula into intensive care. Lara's hands were bandaged quickly, but she barely felt the sting. All her focus was on her little girl, lying unconscious, fighting for her life. Mrs. Alabi sat beside her daughter in the waiting room, her face pale with worry. Mr. Alabi paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Every time the door opened, Lara jumped, hoping for good news, but the minutes dragged on with no updates. He tried to kill her, Lara whispered, staring blankly at the floor. He tried to kill our daughter. I know, darling, Mrs. Alabi said softly, rubbing her daughter's back. We'll get through this. Specula is strong. She'll make it. But Lara couldn't shake the image of Vincent standing over Specula, the look of rage in his eyes. How had it come to this? How had the man she had loved fallen so far? Days passed and Specula clung to life. Her small body was covered in bandages, her skin scarred by the burns. The doctors were cautious in their prognosis, but they assured Lara that daughter was strong and had a fighting chance. Meanwhile, Vincent was taken into custody, charged with attempted murder and child abuse. Lara couldn't bring herself to visit him in jail, nor did she want to. The man she had once loved was gone, replaced by a shell of bitterness and rage. His descent into madness had been gradual, but this final act of violence had shattered any hope of reconciliation. As Specula slowly healed, Lara knew their lives would never be the same. The scars would fade, but the trauma of that day would linger in her heart forever. One afternoon, as Lara sat beside her daughter's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of Specula's chest, she whispered softly, I'm so sorry, my baby. I should have protected you better. Specula's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and her small hand reached for her mother's. Despite everything, she smiled, a weak but pure smile. Dada, she whispered, her voice raspy. Tears welled in Lara's eyes. She kissed Specula's forehead, her voice trembling. No, sweetheart. Daddy won't hurt you anymore. You're safe now. But deep down, Lara knew that the road to healing would be long for both of them.